Here's something that might actually make you a little uncomfortable. The food that's spiking your blood sugar the hardest right now probably isn't the donut. It's not the soda either. Most people already know to watch those. We've been warned about candy and soda since we were kids. It's something sitting in your kitchen right now that you've been told over and over is the healthy choice. And because you trust it, you're eating more of it more often with zero guilt, while your blood sugar quietly climbs every single time. I've spent years digging into how food actually behaves once it hits your bloodstream, not how it's marketed on the front of the box. And the gap between those two things is bigger than almost anyone realizes. So today I'm walking you through 7 everyday foods that are secretly working against your blood sugar, most of them sitting in the healthy aisle, a few of them things you'd never suspect in 100 years. By the end of this, you're going to look at your own grocery cart completely differently. Before I get into the first one, if you've ever checked your blood sugar after a meal you thought was clean and been confused by the number, drop that in the comments. What did you eat and what did the number say? I read every single one, and honestly, it's those comments that tell me what to dig into next. This channel exists because of exactly those stories. Let's get into why this happens in the first place. Because once you understand the mechanism, you'll never look at these 7 foods the same way again, and you'll start spotting this pattern everywhere, not just in the 7 things I'm about to show you. Your blood sugar doesn't just respond to sugar. That's the part almost nobody explains clearly. It responds to how fast a food turns into glucose in your bloodstream, how much insulin your body has to release to deal with it, and what else is or isn't in that food slowing the whole process down. A food can have 0 grams of added sugar on the label and still spike you harder than a candy bar if it's processed in a way that strips out the fiber and structure that would normally slow digestion down. That's the trick. That's how healthy foods sneak past you. Think about it this way for a second. Your gut doesn't care what the front of the package says. It doesn't know the word natural or organic or low fat. It only knows structure, fiber, fat, protein, water content, how processed something is. Strip that structure away, and even a completely natural food can behave like pure sugar by the time it reaches your bloodstream. That's the entire secret behind every single item on this list. So here's what I want you to do. You don't need to cut all 7 of these out of your life starting today. Some of them just need a small adjustment. What you pair them with, how much, what time of day, I'll tell you exactly what to do with each one as we go. So by the end of this video, you'll have 7 specific doable changes, not just 7 things to feel guilty about. Let's start with the one that catches almost everybody off guard. Number 1 is white rice, but more specifically, what we don't talk about with it. Most people already half suspect rice. They've heard somewhere that carbs are carbs and rice is a carb, so there's already a little flag in the back of their mind. What catches people off guard is how much it spikes blood sugar compared to almost anything else they're eating, including dessert. That part genuinely surprises people every single time I explain it. Here's why. White rice has had the bran and the germ stripped away during processing, which means the fiber that would normally slow digestion down is gone before it ever reaches your plate. What's left is almost pure starch, and starch breaks down into glucose extremely fast once it hits your gut. There's nothing left in the grain to put the brakes on. Your digestive system goes to work on it almost immediately, and within a short window after eating, that starch has already converted into a flood of glucose hitting your bloodstream all at once. This matters most for the people who think they're already eating clean. A big bowl of plain white rice with grilled chicken and vegetables looks like a perfectly balanced plate, and in a lot of ways it is lean protein, some greens, a grain. But that mountain of rice sitting next to the chicken can drive a blood sugar spike that rivals a slice of cake simply because of how fast it's absorbed and how little resistance your body puts up against it. The chicken and vegetables on that plate are doing very little to slow down the rice once it's eaten in that volume. There's also a portion problem that compounds this. A restaurant scoop of rice is often 2 to 3 times what a single serving actually looks like. Most people aren't measuring, they're filling the bowl until it looks satisfying. And because rice feels light, compared to something fried or sugary, people give themselves permission to eat far more of it than they would of almost anything else on the plate. What to actually do about it? You don't have to give up rice entirely, and I'm not telling you to. Swap a portion of it for brown rice, which still has the bran intact and digests noticeably slower, or try something simple that a lot of people don't know about. Cooking your rice, then letting it cool in the fridge before reheating it actually increases something called resistant starch, a type of starch your body absorbs more slowly, almost like it converts part of the rice into something closer to fiber. Or, the simplest fix of all, cut your usual portion in half and replace the other half of the bowl with vegetables. Same plate, same meal, completely different impact on your numbers. Number two is dried fruit. And this is the one that genuinely upsets people when I explain it because it feels like such a betrayal. Dried fruit gets sold as a natural snack, the better for you alternative sitting right next to the candy aisle, often in nearly identical packaging. And in some ways, sure, it's got fiber and nutrients that fresh fruit has. Nobody's claiming dried fruit is junk food in the way a candy bar is junk food. But here's what almost nobody factors in when they're tossing a bag into their cart. Drying fruit removes the water content, and removing the water concentrates everything else that's left behind, including the natural sugar. Think about what a raisin actually is. It's a grape that's lost almost all its water weight, which means all the sugar that used to be spread out through a much larger, juicier piece of fruit is now packed into a tiny, dense, chewy version of itself. A handful of raisins or dried mango can carry as much sugar, gram for gram, as a handful of actual candy. You're just not thinking of it that way because the label says fruit, not candy, and your brain treats those two words completely differently even when the sugar content tells a similar story. The portion size is the silent killer here too. Nobody eats just a tablespoon of raisins, the technical serving size printed on the box. You eat a handful while you're standing at the counter, or you toss a generous scoop onto your oatmeal, and that handful might be the sugar equivalent of 3 or 4 servings of the fresh fruit it originally came from. Because it's dry and light, it doesn't feel like much in your hand, which makes it incredibly easy to eat far more than you'd ever eat of the fresh version. There's another layer to this that's worth knowing. Because dried fruit has so little water and fiber left relative to its sugar content, it digests faster than fresh fruit does. The fiber that remains isn't enough to meaningfully slow down a sugar load that's now several times more concentrated than it started out. So you get a faster, sharper rise in blood sugar than you'd expect from something with the word fruit stamped across the front. What to actually do? If you love dried fruit, treat the portion the way you'd treat a dessert. Small, deliberate, eaten mindfully rather than grazed on straight from the bag. Pairing a small amount with a handful of nuts helps because the fat and protein in the nuts slow down how fast that concentrated sugar gets absorbed. But honestly, fresh fruit in its whole form, with the water and fiber still intact exactly the way nature packaged it, is almost always the better everyday choice if blood sugar is something you're watching closely. Number three is fruit juice, even the 100% juice, no sugar added kind sitting in the health food section. This one trips people up because the label feels honest, almost virtuous. No sugar added, so what's the problem? If there's no added sugar, surely it's just fruit, and fruit is good for you, right? The problem isn't what's been added, the problem is what's been removed. Juicing strips the fiber out of the fruit, and fiber is exactly what slows sugar absorption down in your gut. When you eat a whole orange, the fiber in the pulp and the membrane wraps around the natural sugar and physically makes your digestive system work harder to extract it, slowing the whole process down so the sugar trickles into your blood instead of rushing in. When you drink the juice from 4 or 5 oranges in one glass, you get all of that sugar with none of the fiber left behind to hold it back, so it hits your bloodstream almost as fast as if you'd had a glass of soda, even though the sugar itself came from fruit. And the volume problem stacks directly on top of that. Nobody squeezes one single orange into a glass and calls it breakfast. A standard glass of orange juice is often the juice of 3 to 4 oranges pressed together. Think about that for a second. Would you ever sit down and eat 4 whole oranges in one sitting back to back? Almost nobody would. It would feel like too much fruit. But drink the juiced version of those same 4 oranges, and it goes down in under a minute without a second thought because liquid doesn't trigger the same fullness signals that chewing solid food does. There's also a temperature and speed factor that compounds this. Cold liquids tend to be consumed quickly, often gulped rather than sipped, which means that entire sugar load arrives in your stomach and small intestine in a very short window, rather than being spread out the way eating would naturally spread it out. What to actually do? Eat the whole fruit instead of drinking it whenever that's an option for you. You get the fiber, the water content, the chewing time, and a more reasonable portion almost automatically because eating 4 oranges takes real effort and time in a way that drinking their juice doesn't. If juice is a routine part of your life that you're not ready to give up, keep the serving genuinely small, 4 ounces, not a full glass, and have it alongside a meal that includes some protein or fat, which helps blunt how fast that sugar gets absorbed. Now, before we move to number 4, I want you to notice something. The first 3 foods on this list all share the exact same hidden thread. Something natural had its fiber or structure removed during processing, and that removal is what turned a normal food into a blood sugar problem. Keep that thread in mind because it's about to show up again in a place you'd never expect. Number 4 is flavored yogurt. And this is genuinely one of the most disguised foods in the entire grocery store because the disguise is so convincing. Plain yogurt is a genuinely great food. It's got protein, it's got probiotics that support your gut, and there's decent evidence it can actually help with blood sugar regulation over time rather than hurt it. Nobody's coming after yogurt itself here. But the second you walk down the flavored yogurt aisle, the strawberry, the vanilla, the dessert-inspired flavors with cake or pie names on the label, you're often looking at something a lot closer to a dessert wearing a health food costume than an actual health food. A lot of popular flavored and low-fat yogurts make up for the fat that's been removed by adding a meaningful amount of sugar instead, sometimes landing at 15 to 20 grams or more per small single-serving container. Verify exact gram figures against current label data before publishing, since formulations vary by brand and region. That's a number that can land close to what's sitting inside an actual scoop of ice cream, packaged instead in a cup with a spoon that makes it feel like breakfast rather than dessert. The low-fat label is doing an enormous amount of psychological work here, and it's worth slowing down on this specifically because it explains so much of why this trick works as well as it does. For decades, low-fat was marketed to us as essentially synonymous with healthy or good for you. So when people see those words on a yogurt cup, the brain does a quick automatic translation, low-fat equals smart choice, without ever flipping the container over to check what replaced that fat. In a huge number of cases, what replaced it was sugar, and sugar is the ingredient that actually drives your blood sugar response, not fat. What to actually do? Buy plain, unsweetened yogurt, Greek or regular, whichever texture you prefer, and add your own flavor on top with fresh fruit, a sprinkle of cinnamon, or a small drizzle of honey if you want some sweetness. This single swap puts you back in control of exactly how much sugar ends up in your bowl instead of a food company deciding it for you, and you'll usually end up with a fraction of what's in the flavored version while still getting something that tastes satisfying. Number 5 is granola and granola bars, the snack that built its entire reputation on sounding wholesome, almost earthy, almost virtuous. Oats, nuts, a little honey, maybe some dried fruit mixed in. It sounds like the picture of clean eating, the kind of thing you'd imagine someone eating on a hike. And to be fair, the raw ingredients genuinely are healthy on their own, but most commercial granola is essentially oats and nuts bound together with a meaningful amount of added sugar or syrup, then often baked with oil that adds extra calories without adding anything that actually helps your blood sugar response. A lot of popular granola bars carry close to the same sugar content as an actual candy bar, just marketed and shelved next to the protein bars and the trail mix instead of sitting near the chocolate. What makes this one especially sneaky is something I'd call the health halo effect. The word granola itself carries so much built-in trust that people pour a generous, uncounted portion over their yogurt or eat 2 bars back-to-back as a midday snack without a second thought about the quantity, when a much tighter, more deliberate portion of either would tell a noticeably different story if you actually checked it on a glucose meter afterward. There's a layering effect worth mentioning too because it ties directly back to food number 4. A lot of people pour sweetened granola onto sweetened flavored yogurt, thinking they've made one reasonably healthy choice, when really they've stacked 2 sources of added sugar into a single bowl and called it breakfast. Individually, each food might seem like a small indulgence. Stacked together, they add up to something much closer to a dessert. What to actually do? Check the sugar line on the nutrition label before you look at the calories or the protein number. That's the line that actually matters most for your blood sugar response. Or if you enjoy making things yourself, put together your own version with rolled oats, a mix of nuts and seeds, and just a touch of natural sweetener like a small amount of honey or maple syrup so you know exactly what's going into it and roughly how much sugar you're actually eating per handful. Number 6 is bread labeled multigrain or wheat. And this is not the same thing as whole grain, even though the marketing wants you to believe it is. This is one of the most common label tricks in the entire grocery store, and it works because the word sounds so close to what shoppers are actually looking for. Wheat bread simply means the bread is made from wheat, but white bread is also made from wheat. Every loaf of bread you've ever bought, technically, is wheat bread, unless it's made from a different grain entirely. The word wheat on its own tells you almost nothing about whether the fiber is still intact. Multigrain causes a similar problem. It just means more than one type of grain was used somewhere in that loaf. Those grains can still be heavily refined and stripped of fiber exactly the same way white flour is. You can have a multigrain bread that behaves metabolically almost identically to plain white bread simply because none of those multiple grains were left whole. Neither phrase guarantees the fiber-rich, slow-digesting bread that people picture in their head when they reach for it over the plain white loaf sitting one shelf down. And because the bread is often darker in color, sometimes from molasses or caramel coloring added specifically to look more whole grain, the visual cue reinforces a false sense of security that the ingredient list doesn't actually back up. The only phrase that reliably means what most people think it means is 100% whole grain or whole wheat, listed as the very first ingredient on the list, not buried somewhere in the middle behind refined wheat flour. Skip that distinction, and you might be eating a loaf that behaves almost exactly like white bread once it hits your bloodstream, despite paying a premium price for the darker color and the reassuring, earthy-looking packaging. What to actually do? Flip the bag over and check that the very first ingredient listed says whole wheat or 100% whole grain, not just wheat flour, which is a different thing entirely. As a quick second check, look at the fiber content per slice. If it's under 2 to 3 grams, treat that bread the way you'd treat white bread because metabolically, that's close to what it actually is, regardless of what color it is or what the front of the bag promises you. Number 7 is your morning coffee order, specifically what's been added to it, not the coffee itself. Black coffee has essentially no meaningful effect on blood sugar for most people, and in some research, it's even been associated with modest metabolic benefits over time, so this isn't an attack on coffee as a drink. But the version a lot of us actually order, the flavored latte, the blended frozen coffee drink piled with whipped cream, the bottled coffee beverage pulled from the fridge case at a gas station, can carry an enormous amount of sugar, sometimes more than an entire can of soda, all dissolved into something that doesn't even register in most people's minds as food or a meal. You drink it on the way to work, you finish it before you've even sat down at your desk, and you never mentally log it as a meal the way you'd log a plate of food, even though your blood sugar absolutely registers it as one, complete with its own insulin response, regardless of whether your brain filed it under drink or breakfast. This one is sneaky for a very specific physiological reason. Liquid sugar hits your bloodstream faster than the same amount of sugar eaten inside solid food because there's no chewing involved, no solid structure for your digestive system to break down first, nothing slowing it down on the way in. It goes from cup to gut to bloodstream about as efficiently as sugar possibly can. What to actually do? This doesn't mean give up your coffee order or start drinking it black if that's genuinely not for you. It means knowing what's actually in the cup you're holding. Ask for half the syrup pumps instead of the standard amount, size down to a smaller cup, or add a sprinkle of cinnamon and a splash of regular milk instead of a flavored syrup. Small swap, same comfort and ritual, a completely different effect on your numbers by the time you finish it. Now, let me give you a quick composite picture of how this usually plays out across an entire day, because seeing all 7 of these laid out together, stacked the way they actually show up in a real routine, makes the whole pattern click in a way that looking at them one at a time doesn't. Think of someone, we'll call her Maria, and to be completely clear, this isn't one specific real patient or client. It's a composite, a pattern I've seen repeat itself over and over with people who reach out describing almost the exact same week, just with different names attached. I'm building her out of dozens of conversations that all sounded remarkably similar. Maria considered herself a healthy eater, genuinely, and by a lot of normal standards she was. Greek yogurt for breakfast, flavored, vanilla, the kind with a cheerful label, with a generous scoop of granola on top for crunch and extra nutrition. A glass of orange juice alongside it because it's just fruit, and fruit is good for you, so why would she think twice about it? A flavored latte on the drive to work, her one small daily treat that felt earned. White rice with dinner most nights because it felt like the lighter, safer option compared to pasta or potatoes, something she'd specifically chosen because she thought it was the smart choice on the menu. On paper, looking at that day from a distance, nothing about it looks like junk food. There's no candy, no soda, no obvious indulgence anywhere in the day, but stacked together, that's 5 of the 7 foods on this list, each one adding its own quiet spike, one after another, all day long, compounding on top of each other without a single moment where Maria would have looked at her plate and thought, this is unhealthy. When she made a handful of small, specific swaps, plain yogurt with her own fresh fruit stirred in instead of the flavored cup, a smaller portion of homemade granola instead of a heavy commercial pour, whole fruit instead of the glass of juice, half the syrup in her coffee order, and half her usual rice portion swapped for extra vegetables at dinner, nothing dramatic happened in terms of effort. No diet plan, no clean eating overhaul, no giving up entire categories of food. Just 7 small, specific adjustments layered onto a routine she was already living, and her numbers responded. That's really the whole point of this list, and it's worth sitting with for a second. It's not about eating less, and it's definitely not about eating worse food that tastes like punishment. It's about knowing which of the choices she already trusted were quietly working against her the entire time, hidden behind labels and habits she'd never had a reason to question. So here's what I want you to actually do this week, because a list like this is only useful if you act on it rather than just nodding along and closing the video. 1. Go check your yogurt and your bread labels today, not later this week today, the next time you're in your kitchen, and see how many grams of sugar are actually sitting in that yogurt cup, and whether your bread's first ingredient genuinely says whole wheat or 100% whole grain. 2. If you drink juice every morning as part of your routine, switch to the whole fruit version for the next 7 days as a simple experiment, and just notice how you feel afterward, your energy, your hunger an hour or two later, all of it. 3. The next time you order coffee, ask for half the syrup or skip the flavored version entirely just once, and see if you even notice much of a difference in enjoyment after a few tries. A lot of people are surprised at how quickly their taste adjusts. 4. Swap half your usual rice portion for extra vegetables at your very next dinner that includes rice, and pay attention to whether you actually feel less full afterward or just as satisfied. None of these require you to overhaul your entire diet starting tomorrow morning. Stack them in one at a time the way Maria did, and give each one a week or two before adding the next. And if anything in this list genuinely surprised you, that's exactly the reaction I'm hoping for, because it means you're starting to look past the label and the marketing and actually asking what a food does once it's inside you, which is the single most useful habit you can build if you're serious about understanding your own blood sugar. If you want to know exactly what to eat instead, the foods that actually work in your favor, and start helping undo some of what we just talked about, that's a separate list, and it might surprise you even more than this one did. I'll walk you through it in the next video. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.